Fire Emblem as a series has always taken inspiration from medieval European literature and combined it with a Japanese anime aesthetic and storytelling structure. The central iconography of the newest game, a fell dragon versus a divine dragon, can be seen as evidence of that, since dragons are associated with the devil in European mythology and with gods in Eastern mythology. For some reason, the devil dragons are always wrinkly old men in these games, while the divine dragons are practically child porn, so read into that however you want. The point is, it's always been about this blend of cultures, whether it's a direct reference like Sigurd or Beowulf, or more general ideas that crossover, like foreign warriors/invaders from a desert country that we see showing up in Fire Emblem a few times. Since all the names in this game are French, I thought, let's jump into some French medieval literature to look for themes that might show up in the new game. Let's start by talking about Lancelot. In most legends, Lancelot is the son of King Ban, usually around this area of northern France. He's born right as his home kingdom falls to enemy invaders and is carried away from the castle by the Lady of the Lake. And if you're wondering if this is the same Lady of the Lake as Excalibur or a different one, the answer is sometimes. Lancelot goes on too many adventures to count, though one of his more notable ones is the slaying of a dragon, hint hint, and he eventually betrays King Arthur by sleeping with his wife. Depending on if this is the Vulgate or Mallory version of the character, Lancelot can get an insanity plea to defend his actions. Lancelot's final adventure is to obtain the Holy Grail, a feat he fails to achieve because he is not a good enough person. It ends up being obtained by Galahad, his son, who inherits all of his prowess and none of his flaws. I don't think that's how inheritance works, but apparently it's how it works in medieval Europe. Lancelot then ends up bringing down the entire Round Table due to infighting when Arthur finds out about Lancelot having an affair with Guinevere. His story, especially in the Mallory version, is the conflict between his desire to be a good knight and loyalty to Arthur and his love for the Lady Guinevere. Now, let's jump back into the Fire Emblem trailer. I noticed immediately that the heroes of old are depicted in a round circle, not unlike the Round Table. The purpose of the Round Table is that it has no head of the table, and that everyone in it is equal. Looking at you two, Marth and Ike, equal. However, King Arthur is still the king and leader. I like to think that we can look at Marth as being Arthur and Toothpaste Man as potentially being Lancelot. The reason I think this is because Lancelot and Arthur are usually depicted as best friends, and Lancelot is the most loyal knight before the affair. Toothpaste Man and Marth are shown to have a bond together during the trailer. They do things like opening this door together and mind merging into one being. God, I hate anime. Marth is also known as the Hero King in Fire Emblem, wields a magical sword, and is always getting top billing in the franchise despite all of his games being rather mediocre, just like King Arthur. Finally, though Marth's falchion mimics many depictions of Excalibur and fits him into that King Arthur imagery, Alier's sword Liberation takes French inspiration in the spelling of its name and its design. The hint is very ornate and wide, similar to the famous sword of Charlemagne. Joyeuse? I don't know how to say it. We'll touch on some Charlemagne-specific theories a bit later. For now, let's jump back to Lancelot. As we've discussed, Lancelot betrays King Arthur and brings down the Round Table through infighting. My theory is that Alier is going to betray Marth. This is actually something I've seen a lot of people comment about, that Alier is part Divine Dragon and part Fell Dragon. If you look closely at the Toothpaste Man, you may notice that his hair and eyes are actually two different colors. This barely noticeable detail may be hinting at the duality of the character. The red eye is similar to the red eyes of the Fell Dragon, while the blue eye is similar to the blue eyes of the Divine Dragon. Another thing to note is that dragons in Fire Emblem traditionally go insane, become violent, and are corrupted over time. Anankos, Grima, and Duma are all great examples of this story. This actually plays really well with the Vulgate version of Lancelot, whose main flaw is that he goes insane or berserk at pivotal moments. And of course, we see this theme playing out in the name of the primary antagonists, the Corrupted, as if to imply that they were good people driven insane as well. Okay, I promise we go back to Charlemagne. So let's do that. Charlemagne was the real-life king of the Franks starting in 768 AD. He's known mostly for quote-unquote Christianizing Western Europe, aka forcing conversions under threat of murder, and was considered the sole protector of the Catholic Church during his time. He was someone who truly sought to restore the Roman Empire, and came very close to doing so. He undertook numerous military campaigns in three major areas: Lombardy, Saxony, and Hispania. He also fought a notable rebellion in Aquitaine. References to Charlemagne and his legacy are found all over medieval literature, and he was one of the most influential kings in all of medieval Europe. Let's take a look at that mural again. The trailer describes the map as 4 realms surrounding a Holy Land. Looking at the Holy Land, we see the signs of corruption, with this dark and evil-looking ring surrounding the central island and cutting it off from the rest of the world. Or we could look at this as the surrounding world being corrupted, and the Holy Land being a final holdout of a corrupt world. One other thing to note is that while the 4 realms look separated, if you look closely you can see that all 4 of them touch and form a ring. So we have this fractured but ultimately united world, and the corruption is separating the world from the Holy Land. The layout of this land actually feels very similar to Charlemagne's Europe, not in shape, but in concept. Just like Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire, the world is fractured and broken, holding together by a thread, and the people are separated from their church leadership. It's a romanticized view of what Charlemagne did, sure, but I didn't expect a Fire Emblem game to deal with the complex reality of political genocide. Instead, we're seeing them take the ideas Charlemagne believed in, that he was liberating a world fragmented by the fall of the Romans and saving his faith. I mentioned the 4 major campaigns that Charlemagne underwent, which just so happened to numerically coincide with the 4 areas of the game. Wow, crazy how that works. Of note, 2 of them are successful campaigns, but the one in Hispania failed, and the 4th was putting down a rebellion. My theory is that Eliere will fail, and one of the 4 realms will fall to the corrupted. Probably the first realm we visit to set the stakes narratively, though Eliere will probably revisit this realm towards the end of the game to finally save it, showing us a first-hand look at a realm devastated by the Fell Dragon, and letting us see how he's grown over the course of the narrative. I also think that one of these nations will betray the Holy Land, turning against Eliere. This rebellion could link up with the Lancelot themes from earlier if you wanted to combine both theories. I would think this one would be towards the end of the game, sandwiching the 2 successful but ultimately simple plots in the middle of the game. Though again, this is pure speculation. I have no idea which nations would match which of Charlemagne's campaigns, though I'd love to hear theories. Finally, I'd like to talk about the Song of Roland, one of the oldest and most influential pieces of French literature ever. I wasn't sure I wanted to touch on this piece since the Elieve games already take a lot of inspiration and names from this story, and I wasn't sure if Fire Emblem would go down this route again, but ultimately I decided to include it. This story takes place during Charlemagne's campaign in Spain, though this version of the campaign is notably more successful than the historical one. Roland gets caught up in a skirmish he wasn't supposed to, and tries to use an ivory hunting horn to call out to Charlemagne's main force for help. But Charlemagne arrives too late, and Roland dies with the horn at his lips. If we go back to my theory about Engage, I said that the campaign in one of the realms would fail, to match history, and we'd return later. My theory is that the Song of Roland has some influence on this return visit, since it offers up a more successful version of the campaign as its setting. During the final act of the game, the ring will not work, just like how Roland's horn wasn't able to call for help from Charlemagne. But instead of dying while continuing to call for help, Eliere will learn to stand on his own 2 feet and win the day anyway. This almost has to happen at some point for the story to be good. Marth has to get out of the way for Eliere to shine in his own story at some point, so this plot point does make a lot of sense to me. It probably has the least amount of evidence, but hey, it makes sense narratively, so I may as well include it. And that brings our stories to an end. And while I've got you here, why don't you subscribe so I can get access to hormone replacement therapy? If you subscribe to the channel, I can grow boobs and eventually be able to offer up higher quality content. Because boobs. So hit that button and invest in our future together. It'll make you happy.